A special shout out to Chris Bathke, Charles, and Nick Proctor for becoming the newest members of Team Southpaw on Patreon. Your names will forever be etched into the halls of Valhalla.
This is Sam.
This is Yasmin.
And this is Southpaw. A note to our loyal listeners. If you love the show, please support us and help us get paid for our labor by joining Team Southpaw on Patreon. By becoming a member, you'll get access to bonus content like exclusive articles, fight previews, bonus episodes, transcripts of fight studies, and access to our private chat group on Discord. But more importantly, you will help us supplement the cost of the show, the incredible time and energy Sam and I put into making the show, and you'll be giving us some breathing room not only to juggle Southpaw with our day jobs, but also expand Southpaw into other areas. Show your Southpaw solidarity by supporting us at patreon.com/southpawpod.
Today on Southpaw, we have Yasmin, a trainer from the Haymaker Gym in Chicago. It's a gym that I, along with a lot of other people on the left, have been interested in, which is why I wanted to have someone from the gym on, because I think there's a lot we can learn from Haymaker. But before we start, I have to thank Brad, the Wing Chun instructor at Haymaker, for setting this up. And I can't leave out his son, Reed, the 10,000 Fists of Divine Solidarity, for his excellent job as assistant. Hi, Yasmin.
Hi, Sam. How are you?
I'm good. So we got a lot to cover, so let's just get right to it. Let's first start by explaining what is Haymaker.
Yeah, so Haymaker is a community martial arts and self-defense gym based in Chicago. And we teach a variety of different classes. All of our instructors are volunteers. We have Muay Thai, we have Wing Chun, we have kickboxing and capoeira, as well as the class that I help instruct, which is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu based self-defense for women and LGBTQ people.
What is the origin story behind Haymaker? Like, how did it start and why did it start?
So, to be honest, I wasn't really around when Haymaker started, but I know it started sort of after the election of Trump, and we originally had our own space that we were renting, and it was sort of like a project in response to spikes in violence against marginalized people, people of color, queer people, and as well as folks on the political left, and things like that.
So Haymaker seems to be a decentralized and flat organization. So it doesn't seem so important who was the founder or who were the founders, which allows itself to keep running autonomously with new people picking up the slack and keep it evolving over time. Now, this is very different from martial arts in general, which has a piety to the past. Have you found some people have a problem adjusting to this type of democratic martial system?
Like, speaking for myself, coming from a more traditional martial arts training, or if you've been in a very hierarchical gym, it feels like almost sacrilegious if you're like teaching something and you're not a black belt. But that's something that I've personally come to unlearn, because particularly if you're teaching beginners, and particularly if you're teaching people who maybe have some interest in sport, but whose interest doesn't really align with maybe most of the folks at a traditional martial arts gym, then, the kind of teacher you need or the kind of instructor you need is also different.
Are there any pre-existing gyms or organizations Haymaker models itself after or draws inspiration from?
With regard to like the founding or origin, I'm not sure the answer to that question. I can tell you that, you know, currently, and at least for, my involvement, I can say that I'm definitely always watching what other gyms are doing, like, particularly like Pop Gym or Four Elements Fitness. And on my Instagram and Facebook and things, I'm always trying to like kind of follow or watch kind of other similar projects around the country. And I'll also say that I actually I'm not from Chicago. I'm from a small Midwestern town, maybe like small city, in which a friend bought some mats and put them in her basement, and just started teaching classes out of her basement. They were marketed as queer self-defense classes. She had them up on Facebook, just kind of with the address, DM for address type of situation, and started teaching out of her basement. And that's actually how I even got involved in martial arts in the first place. So I think that was maybe a little more underground, I mean, literally underground, than the project that Haymaker is doing, or rather the Haymaker project. But I take inspiration from it because it was where I got my start. And I appreciate especially a lot of the ways that she made martial arts accessible for people.
So then how did you first get involved with the gym, with Haymaker?
So I moved to Chicago for a job, and I was just looking for somewhere to train. And previous to moving to Chicago, I'd mainly trained in my friend's basement and at a community college. So my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training was also pretty informal, although I would say the community college was the most formal most formal training that I'd had before moving to Chicago.
How did you first hear about Haymaker?
So I think my friend who was doing the classes in the basement mentioned it to me. So it was clear she had her ear to the ground on these kinds of things. And then upon moving, I had never trained in a formal gym or like a traditional gym. And I wasn't really like keen to start, because I'd been kind of blessed to have this like training environment that was not necessarily so male dominated and coming from, I guess, like a more leftist perspective or more community perspective, at least.
That is the thing, right? Amongst the left, where if you're moving to a new place, you don't want to just go on Yelp and check out gyms. You kind of ask people, what are the safe places to train? I think whether they're fully leftist or they're just LGBTQ or feel marginalized, I think is very important. Then I see that happening a lot where they feel like, I need some vetting beforehand. What do you all know? What are safe places to train?
Yeah, especially I think since this time I have started training at more traditional gyms, and pretty much every gym I have gone to, except for the one that I currently train at, has cops training or teaching, and that was something that I wanted to avoid.
Now, how did you end up becoming a trainer?
Yeah, so I was going to the BJJ classes, and the instructor for that class kind of had a lot going on in their life, and asked me to substitute for them, basically, for a couple classes, knowing that I had some outside training. And I figured, okay, well, I could substitute for a couple classes while they're dealing with some things. And then they ended up just asking me if I wanted to take it over. And I said yes, because there were people coming and people who wanted the instruction, and also people who were open-minded and willing to work together. So I really think of it as like kind of a skill share more than like a skill. Yeah, I guess I would say I think of myself more as somebody who is like facilitating a skill share than I am somebody who is like teaching a class of students. And I mean, that doesn't mean there aren't specific roles. Like me and my co-instructor still refer to each other as the instructors. It does, I mean, we do have a certain role in that skill share, but it's, I think that kind of reframing is helpful to understanding how at least that class functions at Haymaker.
And you said that you weren't there from the very beginning. So from even when you started, has the gym changed?
Yeah, it's changed a lot. When I first started going, we were in one location. We had some issues with the landlord, ended up moving to another location, had some issues with the landlord, and then ended up renting space from this Unitarian church at a discounted rate. And even, locations aside, it's also been different in terms of what classes have been added. And, we only in this most recent location did we start offering a Muay Thai class. So, things have been evolving and changing throughout even my time with Haymaker.
Okay. What about Haymaker as far as its culture or its kind of premise or its curriculum or its philosophy? Has that changed since you've been there?
I think so. I think, one thing that I actually personally pushed for is that, we had kind of an understanding that, we were an anti-police community. And then we had an incident in which a instructor, we showed up to the gym and saw a bullet hole through our glass, and then called the police to make a report for the insurance. And that was, a lot of people weren't okay with that, and said, we will fix it ourselves. We don't need to call police for this kind of a thing and bring them into this neighborhood. So then, that sparked kind of a discussion of like actually trying to make our beliefs a little more, I guess, formalized, or trying to, the things that we agreed upon as a community didn't need to be like unspoken, because that's where room for confusion comes in. For example, this instructor who had, just kind of recently started instructing. So I think that's been a thing. I mean, I think the project started kind of like, I guess when the project started, there was like a little bit of that Antifa hype around it, particularly like around, we're on Fox News and that kind of thing. But I think making like certain beliefs more solid and kind of having expectations from people who are facilitating classes. So another thing is that I'm sure some of the classes were doing this before, but it's become more solidified, and an expectation is for the person who's facilitating the class to ask the members of the class to give their pronouns if they wish. So in making these like little changes to just kind of move the culture forward in various ways.
So with that instructor, or maybe there were even students who were confused about, our window got messed up. Why can't we call the cops?
That was really more of an internal thing. I don't think anyone attending the classes that wasn't.
Oh, they weren't aware of it.
I mean, I wouldn't say they weren't aware of it because there's a bullet hole in the glass. But there's also there's not really like a stark separation between people who attend and people who instruct, in that as organizers of the like at our last meeting, and I think almost every meeting we've had where we're not meeting to train, we're meeting to talk about Haymaker. It's been open to everyone. We have make sure to we tell everybody in the classes hey, we're having a meeting on Sunday. Please feel free to come. There will be food. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And kind of make sure that if someone is coming to class regularly, they're just as much a part of the project as me, in my opinion. I mean, and in the same way that we have people taking care of, sometimes if someone who's not instructing will get to class early to make sure that the mats get set up in time, and somebody else will realize that we're out of cleaning fluid and go grab some and bring it to the next class. And it's not, whereas in a traditional gym, that's like a responsibility that lies on the business owners. But as a kind of more collective gym, I don't feel a really stark separation between, someone who's quote unquote running the project and someone who's benefiting from it. I think it's kind of a little more fluid and overlapping.
Now, what I was getting at before is because amongst the left, it just makes sense when you say no cops, right? It's just understood, but it's one of those things where maybe some people always took it as just that's a thing, but they might not know why that's the thing. There might be some listeners who don't understand why, maybe just the same as that instructor. So why has that become such a thing, not just for your gym, but for a lot of people on the left? Why are they I don't want to train with police officers or maybe even some active military?
Yeah, and that's also a part of our, ethos, and something I personally pushed for to include was that I think, as long as we're not training with and not calling the cops, we should feel the same way as active duty military or as, ICE officers or any other kind of agent of state violence. So especially for me as an Arab American, I think it's important, who's coming from Middle Eastern refugees, it's important for me personally that if folks are going to consider themselves my comrades, that's something I expect. So yeah, I think to your question, the reason that people aren't interested in training with police, first off, outside of a leftist political lens, a communist, anarchist, however people define themselves, there are folks in our classes who are maybe don't consider themselves a communist or an anarchist or someone who's against the state, but has trauma from interactions with police. And to me, those are people that we should be centering and whose needs we should be prioritizing. If you are okay with training with police or active duty military or any of the groups I mentioned, you can go to pretty much any gym in the city, and you'll be fine. You'll get probably some good quality training.
That is not hard to find.
Yeah, you'll be fine. Whereas if you're somebody who gets a pit in your stomach every time you see a cop, that's different. You're not going to be able to find that. And I think that's part of the reason that Haymaker has these standards. We also don't want to be bringing the cops in to neighborhoods. Like, for example, the glass incident. at that time we were in a majority Latinx neighborhood, and if we're calling the cops for to make a report about something, we're also then bringing state violence into the neighborhood, because those cops aren't people who would just, oh, okay, I'm going to make a report and go back to the station. They're going to harass people on their way and harass people on their way out. If we don't end up getting a report and the insurance doesn't take care of it, then oh well, we'll fix it. It's not worth the risk of endangering people.
So there's consequences to your actions is ultimately the point.
Yes, exactly.
And to put things into more, let's say, less political and more human terms, ultimately it's about what people feel comfortable with, whatever the political spectrum is, right? They might just not feel comfortable around police officers, agents of the state, because they have trauma from them. And that's the reason why they came to Haymaker, is to get away from those other training situations where they didn't feel comfortable. So I think for a lot of listeners, what they have to understand is, if you're white and privileged, I guess cops mean something to you. But for a lot of other types of people, especially marginalized people, they don't have the same meaning and they don't make you feel the same level of comfort. In fact, they make you feel uncomfortable and unsafe. And why I say apolitical, because you might not even have any political feelings. You might be just LGBTQ. You might have a certain type of job where you've been harassed by the police. And because of that, you don't feel comfortable. So that's the point that I just wanted to clarify on here, where people just like, oh, they just don't like cops. I don't know why, but there's a reason. There's like a long history. And also there's the violence against minorities and the police shootings in the past. There's so much more to it. The thing about it is, especially people on the left, they assume everybody knows all those things, so they just gloss over it. And one of the things I like to do on the podcast is to define terms. It's like, let's not assume anything. Let's not gloss over things, because we're so good about not assuming for a lot of other things. But when it comes to theory or political things, we assume everybody knows. Yeah, let's not assume that either.
Yeah, and I also think you made a good point about kind of for a lot of white people on the left, understanding that for some people, I don't want to say it's not political, because it is, but
it is.
But I want to say that for some people, it's not a matter of I believe this is unethical and that's why I won't put up with it. It's a matter of no, like I have a physical bodily response, and like this is actually affecting my ability to train, and my ability to like have this safety, particularly for Black Americans, particularly for sex workers, particularly for anyone who's been harassed by the police as a matter of day-to-day life. I think it's important for leftists to like recognize that it's not necessarily about training with people who have the same exact like spoken or articulated beliefs as you, and it's more about expressing a solidarity to people who are harmed by the things that you know are unethical or things that you hate.
No, that's a good point. So even if you've never had the trauma, it's about showing your support and solidarity for people who have been.
Exactly.
And also what I was saying earlier about it's all political, but even if they don't have a political awakening, they don't think about politics, they can still have this trauma.
Yeah. And of course, people who are against state violence because of their political or moral beliefs are often the same people who are against state violence because we're victims of it. But to me, the important thing is just to like take into account that there are a variety of experiences in the same room.
Going back to Haymaker, are the classes free?
Yeah, all classes are free. We do accept donations. They're not required, especially now that we are using space in a church and don't have like at least a higher rent to pay every month. But we also have Patreon subscribers who make that possible. Being able to have that base of Patreon subscribers has been really helpful, because people who come to the class can come to one or two classes and maybe throw a few dollars, but not feel like not feel a sort of pressure unnecessarily. And it also, I think, then opens up, okay, well, it's free. Let me just try this class. And then that's how I think a lot of people become invested. But there are, of course, some challenges to being a free or donation-based project. Because, in looking at trying to add a couple more classes, we're realizing that would increase costs in certain ways. And, that's something that we have to be like, okay, I guess we have to start asking for donations a little bit more if we want to be able to add this class.
For people who might not understand why adding a class equals, more financial struggles, is because that means you require more time from the space. So you have to rent out the space for longer, which costs more money. So that's the financial constraints of adding another class, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And then also, depending on the class, maybe there's like equipment we might need. I know, our equipment's getting pretty old, that kind of a thing. So just wanting to also be able to offer the community a variety of classes they can take and, gear to keep them safe while training it.
So because your classes are all taught by volunteer teachers, is what Haymaker offers all based around like the background and the expertise of the trainers? It's like, who knows this? Who knows that? That's what we're going to offer? Or was it the other way where like, we want to offer these types of classes. Let's try to find somebody who knows that style?
It's definitely more of the first. It's people who get involved who might have a background of some kind and then offer to instruct. I just went to a queer open mat in a Brazilian, open mat is Brazilian jiu-jitsu speak for open gym, basically, like where people go and spar or roll. Met a bunch of people there and told a couple of them about Haymaker and had some had a brown belt offer to come teach a class. So being able to make those connections where people sort of are like, oh, that's a cool project, I would love to volunteer to do that, has been really helpful. I know, in some ways, there's a little bit of the latter in which like people have expressed like, oh, I'd really be interested in learning some Kali. And so then I went to my friend who teaches Kali and mentioned that there's interest and, said, no pressure, but if you ever want to do like even like a one-time class, there's interest.
So y'all try to do what you can when the student base wants something. It's not that you could promise it, but y'all try.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's say someone's first time. Can you run us through what happens from the moment they walk in to the end? Like, give us a feel for the structure of a typical class.
Sure. So I'll just say by giving a disclaimer that I can most speak to my own class. I've attended other classes at Haymaker, but not regularly. Kind of on one-offs. We actually often joke when we have our meetings that this is the first time we actually get to see each other in a while because we're all in the space at different times. So I'd say, so in the class I help instruct, when you walk in, usually, if there's like a few minutes, maybe before or after 4:00 that people are just kind of mingling and waiting for class to start. Once class starts, we usually kind of all circle up, and I'll give my little pitch about Haymaker. It usually goes something like this. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Haymaker. This is an anti-fascist, anti-oppression, anti-sexist, anti-racist space. What that looks like is that we try to respect our training partners by giving them as much autonomy as we can. That means communicating with people. When we're doing drills, you can feel free to communicate, hey, could you increase the resistance a little bit? Or could you loosen up your grip on my wrist there? Please feel free to communicate back and forth and respect your partner's wishes. Other things that looks like is not sexualizing our training partners in the space, not using bigoted language in the space, as well as understanding that we do not condone the use of training of martial arts for any state violence. Every drill is opt-in, so if you're not interested in drilling something, feel free to step off the mats and just watch, or you can go hang out downstairs. If anyone asks you if you want to drill, you can just tell them, nope, I'm going to sit this one out. You don't need any permission to take breaks for water or go to the bathroom. You're free to do as you please. And then I usually kind of run through like, all right, we're going to spend the first half hour doing this, the next hour doing that, and then the last whatever. So that's usually the spiel I give. I know from class to class, the spiel is like a little different. I do know like every class goes around and does introductions with names and pronouns. People who regularly attend the class I facilitate also attend other classes at the gym and say that, the spiel is, a bit different based on the instructor, have different ways of different kind of consent systems. I know like one class uses like a red, yellow, green for during drilling. So whereas I kind of just give people examples on how they could potentially express their needs and boundaries. That's kind of the introduction, and then we'll do a warm up, get into drilling techniques, which has some, and at least in the class I facilitate, some instruction and then some active drilling. And then there's sparring at the end of class. And that's, I think, usually the format, at least for the other classes I've been to, is that we do all try to include some sparring element at the end of class. Whether it's light or heavy probably depends on the experience levels of the folks sparring. I know when people ask me who've been to a couple classes, like, oh, okay, I want to roll, I just try to put them with somebody with more experience, that kind of a thing. Yeah. At the end of class, and I know different classes do it differently. I know one of the classes actually does some political discussion at the end of class. In the one I facilitate, we use a prompt called I like, I wish, I wonder. And you don't have to stick to that prompt, but it helps people feel like they can, particularly with the I wish, to feel like they can give critique without it being a big deal, The other thing that helps is that there's no crosstalk. So once one person gives their reflections on the class, no one else in the circle should really respond to it. So that way that they don't feel like they need to necessarily engage a debate or a conversation about something. They can, give their critique freely. And like I said, people don't have to follow that prompt, but it's helpful. And I really appreciate having a few minutes for reflections because I think it really helps me and the co-instructor understand where people are at and understand, okay, was the pacing too fast? Did people need more guidance on this thing? That sort of a thing to help us improve.
Now, does each class have its own curriculum, or is it based on whatever the teacher wants to teach that day?
It's really class to class. So for a while, the way I was leading the class was more freeform. I would often have some sort of idea of what I wanted to teach and I would see who showed up to the class, and maybe I would be like, oh, there's a lot of newcomers here today, so I'm actually not going to do what I thought I was going to do, and I'm instead going to do something else because I think it would be more accessible. I know that on the flip side, I know like the Muay Thai instructor always has like a Google Doc like ready with all the curriculum that he's planning for the next 2 months.
Nerd.
But I think it's just kind of dependent on the person's personality and what works for them and what works for their class. I am actually very happy to have my co-instructor who's actually got a little more BJJ experience than I do. I personally have more boxing experience actually. But they've really helped to introduce a little more structure. We're now doing like position of the month, where we'll do, this month it's like the position is mount. So we spent the first class reviewing like maintaining good mount and general good principles for when you're in bottom mount. Try not to be flat on your back, keep your elbows tucked, that kind of a thing, as well as escapes. And then today we're going to do submissions and submission defenses. At some point we'll do like the next class, probably transitioning to other positions. And then last month the position was side control. So this kind of way of organizing it I've really liked, because it gives it some structure while also being flexible within the confines of sticking around this one position. It also keeps each class a class you can drop into, which is something I think is important, because we do have a lot of people like drop in to a class and then not come the next week, but then they come the week after, until they sort of manage to like fix their schedule that they can come weekly. And I think with the position of the month, you can kind of drop in and learn the escapes, and then maybe you don't come back, you skip next week, you come the next week, and then we're doing transitions. It's still relevant to you, and it's still you're still not totally lost when you come in. So I would say that the curriculum probably varies instructor to instructor. There's definitely people who are very organized and people who are more fluid, and it just kind of it depends on the class.
Now, with your BJJ class, is it a gi class or no gi? Because I know the gi itself can sometimes be cost prohibitive.
It's no gi. It's always been no gi. I've actually only ever trained no gi personally. And there is also a standing portion, which is not very common in traditional Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gyms. And the standing portion is usually at the beginning. It almost always includes grip breaks. I go through a bunch of different grip breaks, and we play a game called Sticky Hands, where there's maybe a timer running. One person's gripping, one person's escaping, and that's all you're doing. And then as well as various, maybe we'll do like a standing arm bar, or like a defense to like a rear naked choke from standing or something like that, as well as sometimes I'll throw in some concepts that are probably not very, probably borrowed from other martial arts, particularly for the standing portion. So I wonder now, as I'm talking about this, if there are like some hardcore Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu students out there who are enraged at this class or not. But it's flexible and it borrows from other traditions, and it's we're not marketing as a BJJ gym where you're going to get promoted to a certain belt. Like it's a Skillshare where we're like using these concepts, which I think are really great concepts to train in a lot of different ways. So.
Well, what you're speaking to actually goes all the way back to Brazil. So I think a lot of people who learned here in the US aren't even aware of the history. And as time has gone by, because I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu like decades ago. So you used to hear it more then because it was still arriving. But now it's become, I don't know, just become the norm, and nobody knows how the key thing started. But there was an old rivalry that goes back to Brazil with BJJ and Luta Livre. And that it's not by accident that Lula, there's the saying is Lula Livre. It's also a play on words on that. But one of the reasons why BJJ was so insistent on having a gi was because it was cost prohibitive, and they didn't want certain types of people and certain classes of people to take the classes. So Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, especially with the Gracies, if you go back, has a lot of fascist history to it. Now, the art itself is great. Somebody else said in the message board that we're both in, that, sometimes to learn the best techniques, we just have to learn it from whoever, maybe not in person, but through video or whatever, because there's a lot of effectiveness that works, but we take it and then we have to make it our own. And then sometimes we might have to use it against the fascists that taught it to us. You know what I mean? So it's kind of a weird thing. A lot of people who do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu are conflicted about, but I do find that a lot of leftists are training no-gi for a lot of class reasons. Even if they don't know the history, they end up there just because it's so expensive to buy gis.
Yeah, it's expensive to buy gis, and also I think that translates in terms of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gyms are very expensive, and most of the classes they offer are gi classes. It kind of like, because the art requires a gi, and then that kind of like class element translates to other aspects of the art as well. So I definitely get what you're saying there.
I was going to say there's also a side hustle with a lot of these schools where they rent you the gis, but you have to pay for it per day.
Yeah. I mean, and when I started in my friend's basement, we were doing no-gi, and it's why I've pretty much always trained no-gi. I mean, at this point, I actually own a gi, and I've never used it. And I don't mean to say like there's nothing. I don't mean to say there's nothing valuable of training in a gi. At this point, it's just about I've gotten comfortable in no-gi, so it feels weird to put it on. Much to the chagrin of friends who train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and gi, they'll often get sort of frustrated with me that I'm so resistant to it.
Yeah, well, tell them about the whole history of the gi, no gi,
Yeah.
and maybe they'll be more sympathetic. But if you do have a gi, it's good to have, because especially if you got it gifted, because they do last for a long time. They're really sturdy, so they do last longer than rash guards or shorts. So there's that good aspect of it if you end up getting one.
Oh, I had a friend start to try to get grips on my rash guard, and I was like, excuse me, you're going to tear this.
Yeah. So it sounds like even with the instructors, there's a lot of autonomy where y'all have agreed upon ethos about the ground rules. But you can say it in your own script, but there's ground rules about how a class should be structured, what goes into the classes, and how you all deliver it and teach a curriculum is all based on the autonomy of each individual trainer, it sounds like.
Yeah, that's accurate.
Now, how do most of the attendees hear about Haymaker? Is it through referral mostly?
Yeah, it's through referral, or I think our social media, and I feel like often I'll see people on in various Facebook groups, like looking, or just friends on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or whatever, looking for usually they say MMA or kickboxing or something like that, and then I can kind of go through and be like, well, you should come to Haymaker, but also here are some other options in case you're not interested for whatever reason. So I would say, yeah, a lot of word of mouth. I wouldn't say we don't do a ton of promotion. We don't really have the capacity for it right now, just with kind of everyone being a volunteer. But word of mouth has gotten us pretty far, as well as social media. Yeah.
We're really talking about budget here, so there's no marketing budget.
Right.
Now, for your class, do you have a lot of regulars or is it a lot of first timers?
It's both. We have definitely, I'd say probably like 5, like maybe like 5 regulars. And then there's sort of folks who kind of maybe don't come every week, but are like a familiar face. And then we do get new people. So people will often come to my class, not out of any particular interest in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu based techniques, but more just because it's the class that is only open to women and LGBTQ people. And then because of that, maybe they'll start to get comfortable with the idea of training martial arts, and then they'll start going to the other classes. One goal of having that class is to be able to give a space for people to get comfortable with this very physical art, and comfortable enough to the point where they have the confidence to go to more mixed classes and learn different kinds of martial arts.
Now, you mentioned about some of the political leanings of the gym earlier, about some people are anarchists or leftists. So is the gym only for anarchists and leftists, or is open to a wider political spectrum so long as they're not cops or active military and, they just want this training?
Yeah, I mean, anyone can attend the class as long as they're comfortable with and respect our ground rules of, condemning the use of training for state violence and not sexualizing your partners in the space and not using bigoted language and things like that. And I think those for me are what. So when does somebody have to describe themselves a certain way, or does somebody have to have a certain belief? No, but they do have to respect that we do, and that in training in our space, there are like values that we uphold. As long as people uphold those values. Also, I've often thought about this project as kind of direct service in some ways, in that we're providing certain skills to folks who need it, or outside of like a self-defense context. Also, just like training martial arts is mentally and emotionally and physically rewarding, and it definitely has been for me, and that's something that I want to share with people who want it.
Now, you mentioned this earlier. We didn't get a chance to speak about this, but Haymaker is currently at a church of all places, not a place where you would think an LGBTQx, friendly to open and inclusive to Muslims, Jews, and other marginalized people would be meeting at a church.
So for better or worse, churches in the United States are a site of community gatherings and a site of resources, and a site of service for people. Free meals and coat drives and things like that often happen out of churches, because they kind of either have a brick and mortar space that they acquired a long time ago using funds that Christians have, or because of whatever reason they just happen to have this like a little more like power in this country. But also some churches, particularly this one, it's a Unitarian church. Actually, the founder of Black and Pink is currently the minister of this church. And this church also hosts Jewish folks. This hosts agnostic and atheist folks having different meetings there.
What is Black and Pink?
Oh yeah, Black and Pink is a organization that primarily kind of facilitates pen pals with queer people in the free world and queer people in the prison system. I actually have a pen pal through Black and Pink, and they're national, I think. National, probably not international. And they have a pretty strong chapter here in Chicago that also meets at Second Unitarian Church. So when we're looking for new spaces and we're looking at kind of churches and rec centers and community centers, I even had a friend recommend like the Korean American Community Center to me. We're looking at all kinds of places as a potential host. and kind of settled on this place because they emailed us back, and and because it's they already have a history, and the way their programming works is already clearly diverse and open. And for me, that was very important. And I also think that, like, as a queer person, when I see a Unitarian church, I kind of also already know that it's probably going to be fine, you know? And I think, I think that's an important thing too, and just signaling to potential attendees that, like, hey, yes, we're at a church. We're at this church that if you like live in the area at all, you might know that it is already hosting all these kind of leftist or diverse projects, and isn't necessarily is functioning. They do have church services on Sundays, of course, but is functioning as a community center in a lot of ways.
Now, with the schedule and the classes that Haymaker offers, I noticed there's no actual self-defense class. It's a lot of the traditional or sportive martial art forms. So the schedule doesn't look that much different from a typical MMA or BJJ/kickboxing gym. Any reason for that?
I think that's because the people who volunteer are coming from a certain art and have a certain training. Like, I would love to add a boxing class one day. But I would also say that the way we train these martial arts are maybe with self-defense in mind, even if it's not explicitly marketed as a self-defense class. So, I mean, I think I do use the word self-defense at least in the like description for the BJJ class, if not the title. But if you go to a one-off self-defense seminar, what is the usefulness in it? And I'm not saying I'm questioning it. I'm saying that there's debate around it. And maybe in terms of like, I think also in the martial arts community, you get a lot of people who are like, well, really, like, this is useless for self-defense, because how are you gonna, what if somebody does this? Or like, actually, my martial art is better because of A, B, and C. And the way I've always kind of felt about that is, I bet the martial art that you train the most is the best for self-defense.
That makes sense.
Because it's the one that you are most comfortable with and is most built into your muscle memory.
Yeah, that makes the most sense.
Yeah. And then also, I think that these kinds of debates tend to really gloss over the fact that self-defense looks really different depending on who you are and what your risk factors are. Because martial arts is such a male-dominated community, people are often talking about street fighting when they're talking about self-defense, which is just kind of rare. And I mean, unless you're running around picking fights, but generally kind of rare, and maybe not the case for like a lot of women. So it really depends on your risk factors. Like, let's say if you're a sex worker, a full service sex worker, then the type of martial arts you want to train might be different, and then someone who is necessarily like getting into, I don't know, pub fights or something like that. And that's up to you to kind of look at the different arts and see what you think is most useful for self-defense for you. An example I really like to use is that I think a lot of self-defense instructors get on this, like, okay, so if you feel like you're in any danger, you just punch him right in the nose. And it really glosses over that for a lot of people, violence is coming from people you know, or even coming from people you love. And or there's some social repercussion to defending yourself. And that's something that's really important. So if you give somebody, your only options are to do nothing or to punch somebody in the face, and it's your boss who is doing something to you that you're not okay with, like maybe grabbing your wrist or something, like you're probably going to do nothing rather than punch your boss in the face, because then you'll get fired. And it's not about, it's about these like power systems that are actually much bigger than a physical overpowering of any kind. So that's why I like to focus a lot on like grip breaks and things, and managing distance, because if your boss grabs your wrist and starts to threaten you in some way, and you don't feel like you can just punch him in the face because then you're worried you're going to get fired, or it's just not your immediate reaction for whatever reason, but you do feel like you can escape the grip and back up, then you have an option. I'm not saying you shouldn't punch your boss in the face, but I'm saying that you have to give people these like kind of range of options so that they can decide what they feel comfortable using at any given moment. So I think that's important. And to relate back to your original question, maybe that's why some of our classes don't necessarily market as self-defense, but do teach self-defense. It's about giving people the like autonomy and choice and ability to make their own decisions about what they would use rather than prescribing a specific scenario for them, or prescribing like a certain way to proceed. And I think a lot of self-defense classes sort of want to tell you what to do, or tell you what you should do. Maybe if you didn't do it like that, then there's maybe an implicit blame on you because you didn't react in the way that you were taught or that you should have reacted. Whereas maybe in martial arts, it's more about learning kind of a holistic skill set where you kind of set your own strategy or reaction in a, as you would in sparring. And that's speculation. What I'm saying, I'm mostly just speculating about differences here, but I will say that I've been to a lot of self-defense classes, and I actually do continue to go to self-defense classes, even as somebody who's teaching one and training martial arts, because I'm there less for the technique and more to kind of, I'm interested in people's like pedagogy, I guess.
So it sounds like even though it might have happened incidentally, there is an overarching theme, which is of autonomy. So to create a generic self-defense class, it removes a lot of the autonomy of the individual to make decisions based on the context or the situation, and you're prescribing what you should do in every situation. Because when you take all these different martial arts and then you try to pick out which techniques are most effective for a self-defense class, then you're consolidating, then you start removing a lot of options. Then you are, I guess, in a way, by default, reining in people's choices, which I could see that making sense if you're going to see somebody once or twice, like a one-off. But for people who are going to come more often than that, maybe they're a little bit more committed or they're more regular than that, then it really restricts the amount of choices that they have.
Yeah, it restricts the amount of choices, and it also you're also assuming a lot.
Yes.
In terms of assuming, what their risk factors are, and I think that's where things get. For example, if like a white person is teaching a self-defense class, they may not realize that actually a lot of people of color and a lot of Black Americans, especially, like, are going to have different consequences for reacting in certain ways, and they're going to be teaching you that, like, you should inflict all this harm on this person, whereas maybe something I might, like, it's just an example, of course you can debate it, but like Maybe if you're worried about the risk of arrest, try to use open palms and make sure to keep your hands like open and up to kind of show, to like kind of use your body language to signal to passerbys and to anyone watching that you're actually being attacked and you're not instigating violence. But if you're not somebody who's at risk of arrest in the same way, that might not be something you think about. So when you're teaching a self-defense class, you might not think to teach that. So I think when you're pulling certain techniques and deciding what's most useful, you also have to think about, why are you deciding that that's most useful? What in your experience is making you think that that's the most useful thing? Is it because it's most useful for you? Or is it like, what other factors in people's lives makes a certain technique useful or not useful?
So it sounds like self-defense as just a class in itself or as a program is actually a very big undertaking. So it's very easy then to have your biases come through, no matter how thoughtful you're trying to be.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think like when you're teaching a sport, you can teach for the sport and potentially let the person take what they want out of it.
It's understood that it's not for all use cases. You're coming here to learn kickboxing. That's what I'm going to teach you. It's up to you as an individual to figure out how you use that in all the different contexts of your life.
Yeah. And something I've really enjoyed doing in this past couple years in Chicago have been actually just like working with folks to, all right, so here's what I know. Like, I know some Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I know some boxing, and what do you know? Maybe you don't know a ton of martial arts, but you know a lot about scrimmage lines at protests. How can we like together figure out how we can help each other's understanding of both of those things? And that's why I also like to think of it as a skill share, because people think like, okay, Yasmin has all the martial arts knowledge and I don't know anything, but that's not true. You know a lot that you can teach me so that I can figure out how to hone and different ways to think about the like techniques that I've learned. And in that way, it's like I've done that with I've had kind of like I wouldn't call it a workshop, because kind of like people, just like friends or organizations that some of it actually has been workshops, full on workshops where like maybe I've done things with Sex Worker Outreach Project or BYP 100 or Brave Space Alliance, which are all like these local Chicago nonprofits or organizations, and tried to kind of like work with the folks to figure out what might be useful, or what are the things that they're worried about, and what in my knowledge can I like use for that, rather than kind of prescribing a certain method of action or whatever course of action.
Yeah, you don't want to speak for them.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, the far right have been emboldened in the past several years. Has Haymaker gotten requests for training from activists and organizers, or do y'all have a lot of activists and organizers coming to your classes?
Yeah, we do occasionally get those kinds of requests, and I think especially when we were starting, and I think a lot of the people involved in the project and in the past and currently are activists and organizers who just happen to also train martial arts and wanted to see the intersection of these two things. And we do occasionally get those requests from different groups or different people who are interested in training. I would say probably all of the trainers are activists and organizers. Yeah, all of us. And also all involved in different things. Like we're not even in the same activists or organizing groups or anything like that. And then, I don't necessarily know everybody's background who attends the classes, but I think that translates as well in terms of who's kind of coming to the classes.
I find this very interesting in that in martial arts or even in politics, there's this kind of uniformity. We all have to think the same, especially in martial arts. We are all wearing the same uniforms, right? We all bow the same way. We enter the training hall the same way. And also in politics, we all want everybody to have the same like policy ideas.
Yeah.
But with Haymaker, it sounds like there's a lot more autonomy. Whether you all meant to or not, there's just a lot of autonomy throughout a lot of ways, even in the ways that y'all decide to organize or do your activism.
Yeah, for sure. Different people are coming in with sort of maybe different causes that they focus on or different ways that they try to work for justice in the world. But what we kind of have in common is that we want those things and we work on those things, and we're also interested in martial arts. And I think for me, like, I like that sort of diversity or like maybe like big tent approach, because I think, then we have all a lot to learn from each other. And I also think it will, make our training better if we have like kind of diverse perspectives.
This is a theme that I've talked about a lot in maybe most of my episodes, but is that this importance of niche left spaces. So what I mean by niche, the big broad tent is all kinds of hobbies, but I find especially with physical hobbies that you could have all kinds of like diversity of, progressive left ideas, but they don't all have to be the same. But the commonality that unifies everybody is this attraction to a physical hobby, whether it's powerlifting or whether it's, yoga or whether it's martial arts. It's the thing that also keeps people from fighting each other. I make this joke, but it's like, if you just talk pure politics for too long, we're all going to be at each other's necks. But if we kind of talk about, whatever our things, maybe sports, maybe it's baseball or whatever, then we all kind of come together. It's like, oh, yeah. It's like kind of pursuing the humanities. There's something other than politics.
Yeah.
There's something that speaks to us on a human level that attracts us all. And now from there, let's extend that love and passion and compassion to politics and the world.
Yeah.
So do you have any helpful words or advice for those listening who might want to start something similar to Haymaker wherever they live?
Make sure you can pay the rent. If not, don't rent somewhere. No.
Well, that's good advice, because then maybe just do something more informal at first, maybe out of a park or somebody's backyard or something.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm getting at. I would say start informal. See, like, try to get a community. And I think, actually Haymaker did start a little more informal. I think it was in somebody's garage, as or like a garage of another like project doing work on the left, but was not martial arts related at all. So I'd say, and if you can, start informally, start getting, even if it's just like you and a few people practicing together and figuring out kind of what a good like structure for classes is, and like that sort of thing. Start informally and build your way up. And if you think you can have a if you whether that means you either build up to the success of like being able to rent your own space, or renting space from somewhere that's shared, or whatever you can do, you can kind of know that there's a lot of different ways to do it. So maybe starting up a gym. I mean, even if you're not starting up like a leftist gym, starting up a gym is a huge project.
Yeah.
It's you have to get a space, you have to get instructors, you have to get materials. But chances are, like, you probably have some equipment between the whatever 5 of you, and somebody probably has like some open space. So see what other people have, and work together to figure something out. And then once you've gotten like a good good understanding, and you have some regularity and you feel comfortable, open it up. And I mean, that's like that's going to be an individual choice. Maybe you don't want to be open to the public. Maybe you do. Think about those questions. And also, reach out to like Haymaker or Pop Gym or other projects like this. And if you're at the point where you're thinking of formalizing and opening up in certain ways, then talk to other people around the country, because it seems like there's a lot of people doing it. I mean, even my friends' classes in the basement are still going,
Wow.
So, and that was, I don't know, like 4 years ago or something. So, yeah, there's always people, and, and finding them and just having these conversations is a good way to get started.
Some mutual aid action.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for your time. Now, where can people find more information about Haymaker?
So our Facebook is definitely most up to date for class schedules and address and stuff. Our website is a little bit under construction right now. You can also find us on Twitter. Our Facebook is Haymaker Gym, and you'll see that the location's Chicago. That's where you can find the most information about us right now.
All right. And also for people who might not even live nearby but want to contribute to Haymaker financially, what should they do?
You should look at our Patreon. You can either give a one-time donation or become a monthly subscriber. As I said earlier, those monthly subscribers are really important. They really help make the gym kind of accessible to folks who can't afford classes, or maybe just don't feel like they have the money at the time to donate. I know, like, we have people who come who they spend their, like, the only money they can spend is the money to get on the train to come. So having those monthly donators is really, really helpful.
Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Now that's the show. We've grown Southpaw purely from word of mouth, so that means it's all organic. So if you're already spreading the word, please continue to do so. If you've never done it, please consider telling your friends, sharing on social media, and also leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. This will make it easier for others to find us. And since this is independent media, every dollar you pledge on Patreon goes a long way in the production of the show and will help us expand with more content on more platforms. Show your Southpaw solidarity by supporting us at patreon.com/southpawpod.